Imagine you are standing in front of this massive, incredibly detailed map of a country, a nation that has been wrestling with, you know, deep, complex internal fractures for generations.
Right, a country with a lot of history.
Exactly. And you are handed a pen and given this seemingly impossible puzzle, you have to redraw this map to create lasting, permanent peace for a highly distinct religious and political community. But, and here is the massive catch, you are not allowed to change a single national border.
Yeah, that is, I mean, that's the ultimate geopolitical riddle, isn't it?
It really is. You cannot carve out a new country.
Because historically, when a distinct community demands sovereignty, the ascendant is always binary. You either violently suppress the movement or you break the host country apart entirely to give them the land.
Right.
There is rarely, if ever, a middle ground.
We are constantly told it is a zero-sum game, but today we are doing a deep dive into a source that proposes a totally different way to solve that exact puzzle. And I want to get straight to the punchline because it is guaranteed to make you do a double take.
It really is a wild premise.
The author asks, what if the solution to Sikh aspirations in India isn't creating a massive, sprawling new country? What if the answer is creating a tiny 108-acre sovereign religious enclave functioning exactly like the Vatican does in Rome?
It is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, it completely reframes the conversation. But before we explore the actual mechanics of this blueprint, it's crucial to establish exactly how we are approaching this deep dive for you, the listener.
Yeah, definitely. We need some ground rules here.
Exactly. Because the source material we are unpacking today involves highly charged history.
Yeah.
We are talking about decades of conflict, profound religious convictions, and frankly, significant trauma.
Real generational trauma.
Right. So to be explicitly clear, in exploring this paper, neither of us is taking a side. We are not endorsing a political stance, nor are we validating any specific historical actions by the Indian government or Sikh separatists.
Not at all.
Our goal is purely analytical. We're simply examining this outside-the-box framework for conflict resolution to see how the author structures it and why he argues it could theoretically work.
Okay, let's unpack this. The source we are looking at is this fascinating 2020 academic paper by Tennyson Samraj. It was published in the International Journal of Social Sciences and Management Review.
And it has a very descriptive title.
Yeah, it's titled Envisioning the Khalsa State Modeled After the Vatican State. So let's look at the history first, because to understand why someone would even propose a Vatican solution for Punjab, you really have to understand the sheer scale of the historical anxiety driving this whole conflict.
You really can.
Mhm.
I mean, you can trace a direct line of escalating anxiety within the Sikh community over, well, basically the last century and a half.
Yeah.
The paper details the 500-year history of Sikhism, obviously, including the Sikh Empire from 1709 to 1849. But the modern tension really begins to crystallize in the late 1800s.
Because at that point, you have the British Empire stepping in and fundamentally changing all the rules of the subcontinent.
Precisely. The British arrive, and in response to them, as well as Hindu revivalisms and this big influx of Christian missionaries, the Sikh community realized they needed a defense mechanism.
Right, they were feeling squeezed from all sides.
Exactly. So they formed the Singh Sabha movement in 1873. And initially, this was largely about cultural preservation, restoring Sikh heritage, building educational institutions, defining their distinct values.
Kind of circling the wagons culturally.
Right. They were essentially asking, in this rapidly shifting landscape, how do we ensure we don't just get absorbed?
But, I mean, cultural preservation only goes so far when you don't actually have a hand on the political steering wheel, right? Reading through the source, you can really see the realization dawn on the community that protecting their faith required actual institutional power.
Which leads directly to the next major shift in the 1920s. The cultural defense of those Singh Sabhas transitions into organized political action. You see the formation of the Akali Dal, which acts as their political wing, directed by figures like Master Tara Singh, and almost simultaneously they formed the SGPC.
That's the Shiromani Gurdwara Parbandhak Committee, right?
Yes, exactly.
The SGPC is just fascinating to me because it functions almost like a shadow parliament, specifically for managing Sikh temples and religious affairs. So now they have essentially built a two-pillar system.
Right, a religious management side and a political wing.
Yeah, working in tandem to consolidate their identity.
And that consolidation really builds momentum. By 1967, after years and years of pushing, the Akali Dal achieves a major milestone. They successfully lobby for the formation of a new Punjabi state based on language and culture.
which effectively detached them from Hindu-majority areas like Haryana and Himachal Pradesh.
Exactly.
Wait, so if they achieved a recognized state based on their culture in 1967, why didn't the push for sovereignty just stop there? I mean, didn't having their own state government solve the problem of political representation?
Well, it solved a regional administrative problem, sure, but it did not solve the deeper spiritual and nationalistic aspiration. And this is where we really have to define a crucial term from the source: the Quam.
Right, the Quam.
A Quam translates roughly to a distinct nation or a people. In 1978, the Akali Dal put out the Anandpur Sahib Resolution. And this wasn't just, a list of political
It's
grievances.
so much bigger than that.
It was a formal assertion that Sikhs were a Quam. They were stating, on the record, that they were a distinct nation that required a specialized status to preserve their fundamental identity.
So the demand elevated from, we want to manage our local roads and schools to we require the absolute freedom to exist as a sovereign people.
Yes.
And that is where this geopolitical pressure cooker really boils over into tragedy. The paper describes how, by 1980, a leader named Sant Darnell Bindranwale galvanized a highly militant phase of this movement.
He did.
He emphasized strict adherence to the faith, taking baptism, joining the Khalsa, the Brotherhood of the Pure, and establishing a fully independent Sikh nation.
And the author objectively notes how this militant phase escalated until it reached an absolute breaking point in 1984.
Yeah, the Indian government's response.
Right. The Indian government, under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, viewed this ardent demand for a separate nation as an existential threat to India's sovereignty. This culminated in Operation Blue Star, where the Indian Army was ordered into the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar.
Which is the holiest site in Sikhism.
Exactly. And Bindranwale and his supporters were heavily entrenched inside.
The resulting battle killed Bindranwale and many others, and the author emphasizes that this left a deep, enduring psychic wound on the entire Sikh community. It was just a catastrophic collision between a community demanding the ultimate security for their faith and a secular state defending its territorial borders.
Which brings us to the profound distinction the author draws to solve this exact impasse. What's fascinating here is how the author separates the concept of a homeland from a holy land.
I mean, those sound incredibly similar, but the paper argues they are functionally opposites in international relations, right?
They are completely different beasts. A homeland is a massive secular territory. It encompasses millions of people, diverse industries, vast geographical borders.
Right.
If a distinct community demands a homeland within an existing country, it requires secession. It challenges the host nation's sovereignty directly, and no modern superpower will willingly slice off a massive, productive province.
Because it leads to the threat of a splintered nation and almost inevitably war.
Exactly. But a holy land is entirely different.
Okay, how so?
A holy land focuses purely on spiritual autonomy within a highly confined, strictly defined space. It is not about controlling secular resources or vast populations. It is about having a permanent, unquestionable sanctuary just for the faith.
So, since carving out a massive new homeland in Punjab is basically a non-starter that would disintegrate India, the author digs through history to find a workaround.
He does.
He looks for a moment when a host country successfully granted a holy land without losing its own nationhood. And to find it, we actually have to leave India entirely and look at 1920s Italy.
We're looking specifically at the 1929 Lateran Treaty. And to understand why this treaty is so revolutionary, you kind of have to look at the 60 years prior.
Oh, the standoff.
Yeah. When Italy unified in 1870, the new Italian government essentially swallowed up all the former territories owned by the Pope. The Pope, feeling his spiritual independence was completely compromised by secular Italian rule, literally locked himself inside the Vatican walls.
He declared himself a prisoner in the Vatican.
Exactly. And he refused to leave because stepping outside meant acknowledging that Italy had authority over the Catholic Church.
That is a 60-year Cold War between the church and the state. I mean, Italy was a sovereign nation, but they had the global headquarters of a massive religion sitting right in the middle of their capital, just refusing to acknowledge their laws.
It was a logistical nightmare for Italy.
So how did they fix it? Well, in 1929, King Victor Emmanuel III and Benito Mussolini sit down with Pope Pius XI, and they come up with this incredible compromise.
The mechanics of the Lateran Treaty are a masterclass in statecraft, really. They carved out an enclave of just 108 acres on the bank of the Tiber River.
Just 108 acres. That's tiny.
It's microscopic for a country. But the treaty granted the Holy See full ownership, exclusive dominion, and sovereign authority over this new microstate. The Vatican literally became its own country.
But it came with massive stipulations. Italy didn't just hand over sovereignty and cross their fingers, hoping for the best.
Far from it. The Vatican was legally bound to remain strictly neutral in all international political matters. Italy handled all foreign policy and external defense for the Vatican.
Yeah.
The Pope's domain only required the Swiss guards for internal security within the walls. It allowed the Pope to be a temporal head of a tiny state and the spiritual leader of, over 1 billion Catholics worldwide.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Wait, so the author is suggesting that Benito Mussolini, of all people a dictator not exactly known for his peaceful compromises, actually provided the ultimate blueprint for modern religious peace.
It's a huge paradox, but yes, he did. By utilizing this treaty, Mussolini separated the Catholic Church's need for spiritual security from the need to govern secular land.
Right.
The Church didn't need to govern the mundane laws of Italy, like taxes or highway construction, to feel safe. They just needed those 108 acres. And because of that strict neutrality, the Vatican was completely spared from being bombed by Allied forces during World War II.
Wow. So the synthesis the author pulls from this is vital. Historical precedence proves that if you give a major religion a confined sovereign space, you allow them to define and defend their faith without competing for secular political power.
Exactly.
So let's take that exact blueprint and map it onto the state of Punjab, because Tennyson Samraj doesn't just suggest this as some loose philosophical concept. He lays out a literal 6-point resolution for creating what he calls the Khalsa state.
Right, and the geographic center of this proposal is Amritsar. Under this resolution, the Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple, and the Akal Takht, which translates to the throne of the Timeless One, would become the new Vatican.
So the chief guru would basically step into the role of the Pope.
Precisely. They become the temporal, legal head of this tiny enclave, while simultaneously acting as the global spiritual leader for Sikhs everywhere.
That addresses the need for a sovereign Holy Land perfectly.
It does. But the author's resolution is equally meticulous about defining the secular boundary. This is crucial for India's stability. Point 4 of his resolution dictates that the broader surrounding state of Punjab remains a completely secular part of the Indian Union.
Okay, so the Sikhs living in Punjab continue to vote in Indian elections. They use Indian currency, and they operate under the Indian constitution.
Yes.
The Akali Dal just continues functioning as a normal Indian political party governing civil, everyday matters in the broader state.
Exactly. The Khalsa state would essentially function like a spiritual embassy. It is a piece of sovereign ground that deeply respects the host nation's broader borders. It would have its own internal security guards for the temple complex, mirroring the Swiss guards, while India maintains absolute control over all defense, border security, and foreign policy.
It's a brilliant framework, but I mean, the 6-point resolution leaves a glaring practical loophole. Point number 6 explicitly states this entire plan relies on appealing to India's goodwill.
Ah, yes, the goodwill clause.
Right. And India is not 1920s Italy. It is a modern, nuclear-armed, secular superpower. Why would a massive secular democracy agree to give up even an inch of sovereign territory just to be nice?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author argues they wouldn't do it just to be nice. They would do it out of rational self-preservation.
Okay, walk me through that.
Unresolved national aspirations are dangerous. They breed endless cycles of domestic unrest, and they often become international concerns, drawing in foreign powers. But granting limited sovereignty over a microscopic space, literally just the acreage of the temple complex, India solves a major domestic conflict overnight.
They give up an inch to secure the miles.
Exactly. They eliminate the oxygen fueling violent separatism. And most importantly, they permanently secure the territorial integrity of the broader Punjab state.
Right, because India doesn't lose a massive, economically vital province. They simply designate a specialized, internationally recognized spiritual zone within it.
And the author suggests that India, as a regional power with a very long history of religious diversity, would actually fortify its own national security by making this concession.
That brings us to what I think is honestly the most fascinating part of this whole paper. The author makes this profound philosophical argument that creating this tiny religious state is actually the ultimate defense mechanism, FR, secular democracy.
Which sounds completely backwards at first.
It sounds totally backwards until you look at how different laws actually function.
It really comes down to the catastrophic danger of mixing legal law with moral law over a large, diverse population.
The source outlines this beautifully. A secular state enforces legal laws, right? things like property rights and traffic violations. But religion enforces moral laws, matters of the soul, and divine truth. The problem is how you punish someone for breaking those laws.
Because secular punishment is inherently temporal. It is limited to the physical world. If you break a secular law, the state incarcerates you, they fine you, or they incapacitate you.
Right.
But religious punishment, by its very nature, deals with the eternal. It deals with damnation, karma, or divine judgment, things that are completely outside the scope of a secular courtroom.
And the author points to history to show us exactly what happens when you give religious leaders secular state power. It results in absolute madness. The paper explicitly references the horrors detailed in Fox's Book of Martyrs.
The medieval examples are grim.
Think about medieval Europe. When a sin becomes a crime, how does a human judge sentence a soul? I mean, you can't put a soul in jail, right?
No, you cannot.
So they resort to horrific physical punishments, excommunication, torture, burning at the stake. These were desperate attempts by religious states to physically purge spiritual impurity from their territory. That is what happens when you blur the lines between heaven and earth.
Which is exactly why the author defines secularism so rigidly here. In this framework, secularism is the rule of law, not the rule of God. No single religion holds a monopoly on truth in a secular society.
Right.
Therefore, if you want to keep a massive, diverse country like India truly secular, you have to ensure religious laws do not bleed into the state legislature. The best way to keep a whole country secular is to give a specific religion a tiny defined playpen where their moral laws apply.
The whole point of secularism is to keep fundamentalism out of government. But this proposal is literally suggesting we draw a circle on a map in the middle of a secular country and say, here is a fundamentalist state. Doesn't giving a religion its own sovereign state, even a micro one, technically endorse fundamentalism?
It doesn't defeat secularism, though. It quarantines fundamentalism. And the author does not shy away from that reality at all. He explicitly states that the Vatican is a fundamentalist state.
Right.
If the Khalsa state is created, it will be a fundamentalist state, governed entirely by religious doctrine.
Because the chief guru is the ultimate authority inside those borders.
Exactly. But the crucial factor here is geography. Because the Vatican is geographically confined to 108 acres, the surrounding city of Rome remains completely secular and free. Because the moral law is isolated to that specific enclave, it doesn't spill over. Under this proposal, Punjab would remain secular while the Khalsa state acts as the fundamentalist sanctuary.
Okay, so it creates a highly visible, highly localized authority.
And that localized authority prevents a dangerous vacuum. The paper briefly notes that we see similar desires across the globe. Muslim communities desiring a caliphate, for instance.
Yeah, that's a great parallel.
When a state fails to provide a safe, legitimate sanctuary for communities to define and defend their faith, you risk the rise of faceless, radical, and violent groups who feel entirely cornered.
Because they have nowhere to go.
Right. Giving religions a legally recognized, globally respected Holy Land completely neutralizes the desperate, violent fight for a massive homeland. It gives the community exactly what they need for spiritual survival without threatening the secular freedom of anyone living outside those 108 acres.
So what does this all mean? Zooming out from the specific geography of Amritsar and the Golden Temple, this deep dive into what is, a pretty niche academic paper, it offers a really powerful new lens for you to view the daily news.
It really does.
We are constantly fed this binary narrative that governments must either crush separatist movements with military force or just watch their countries shatter into pieces. But this Vatican model shows a third door.
It forces us to remember that true freedom must include the freedom of conscience. History shows us, from the Persians to the Romans, that attempting to legislate universal moral laws over a massive, diverse empire always leads to collapse.
Always.
But by utilizing goodwill and creative historical models, modern societies can offer marginalized communities a holy land instead of fighting endless, devastating wars over a homeland.
It is a remarkable shift in perspective, and it leaves me with this final, unexplored thought for you to mull over. We've seen how this Vatican model worked in 1929 for the Catholic Church, providing this 108-acre safety valve for a massive spiritual population.
Yeah.
And we've explored how it could theoretically work today for the Sikh community. But as we move further into the 21st century, the landscape is changing. We live in a world of hyper-connected, deeply ideological digital tribes, many of whom feel completely alienated by their host nations.
That is a very real modern dynamic.
It is, and it raises a fascinating question. In a future driven by intense digital communities seeking physical sanctuary, who else might start asking for their own 108-acre Vatican next? And if you were handed that pen and that map today, where would you draw the line?